we've been talking about a lot of other public goods today, and I think the AI influence on a wide range of goods is an amplifying one. So I'm delighted to have both of you here to chat a bit about what it means to support AI public goods and how we might think about what's required to maintain them and to keep things that might feel public now available in the public interest. In this context, public AI means public access, some degree of public support, and some degree of public accountability. And in particular, in the W3C and the IETF standard, it has to be accessible and publicly funded with some accountability. It should be maintained in the public interest, but that's hard, and that's what we're talking about. And it may be provisioned and developed in a range of ways. It could be publicly inspectable. It could have free and open components. There are groups that are building public interest tools that think that that's not possible for them. They're still supporting the public interest. How do you think about where we are in the state of the knowledge and public commons today?
I think that going way back in the internet and being involved in artificial intelligence was still in the STEAM age and getting my doctorate in that area and seeing what's evolved over a period of time. As we move into an area where you're getting AI and you're now getting the appropriation and collection of data from Wikipedia and other sources, and it's being, it's a commons is being captured and appropriated into proprietary models, there's a huge challenge there. And in my own view, and I take this from my experience in being interested in Berkeley doing the issues around how to get people to have control of their identity and data, and recognizing that that is something that should not be appropriated, that it is something, it's a public good, it's a private good as well, it's something that the people should have. How do you prevent that capture? And I think a lot of the regulatory thinking, and the problem is that they think of governance as an externality. We have to think of governance as being implicit into the technology. It's not an externality. I think that's the key issue. I think the other key issue is there has to be financial incentives for protecting that good. It can't just be something that is a donation, an afterthought. You create all these negative externalities, and then you say, oh, well, let's make up for the mess and put some public funds into it. It really has to be viable in its own terms. And so you need to have some kind of economic model that actually rewards the positive function of being able to create a positive social good. And I think that is really sort of the key element. And this is where I think that the next generation tokenomics are to come out. They're going to could be very significant. And how do you create not just a commons, a governance of a commons, but a means by which it can sustain itself and resist the predation of external capital?
It would be a different investment in a desert ecosystem than in a rainforest ecosystem. So I think analogously for different kinds of cognitive ecosystems, it might be a different rate limiting step or different horizons that come into play. A major piece that transposes across and also within these information ecosystems would be like the reliability of the information and the information supply chain, knowing that there doesn't have to be like an extra loop or cycle, whether it's a person with the consequences on their time and well-being, or whether it's like an AI agent or however we want to think about that, taking like extra cycles to consider information, how that can be grounded, and then not just tracing that back to kind of the seal, but then to go even further past onto basically the meta-governance and the distributed standards and the ways that within and across the organizations there are norms. These are all some starting places.
Who is the public for whom these shared goods are for? If you imagine an ecosystem that has a lot of AI agents, what are the kinds of public goods that they would need in order to maintain a healthy ecosystem?
But how do you take some of those ideas that were sort of pre-AI, but what's the concept of being able to, what are the means of oversight that make sure that the homeostasis of the commons stays in place? And I think that you have, with this notion of the codification of the scientific method, and they call free energy principle, you have something that's scale-free and it's domain-free that is an independent metric that you can allocate to being able to see whether a set of outcomes are consistent or have a greater predictability or have a certain level of risk with them. So you're a subject, what you're trying to do is ground a community in a measure of reality regarding their own goal of keeping their community alive. It's like, what does it mean? What do we have to do to keep this community, this bioregion alive? What are their interdependencies? There's certain goods they have to achieve. There's certain kinds of efficiencies. There's certain kinds of metabolic closures they have to take as a whole in order to make that valid. And so you can start to measure that, and that becomes a principle of the governance, the extent to which how close or how far you're away from that. And they can come and revise that. They can reset that, and there are ways of participation and allocating rewards based on that. But I think it's not an externality. The governance is something that's intrinsic into what it is for that living thing to stay alive. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so the question, who is the public? And as publics and commons and spaces include not just like a broader range of humans and non-humans, what are we going to be doing? So a few pieces on that. One would be recognizing and making explicit and legible multiple timescales. So here's the high frequency timescale, here's a slower rhythm, and nested rhythms that allow for like slower stewardships as well. And then as to interactions, even amongst humans with a similar cultural background and a similar spoken language, still there's a need to have clarity on shared semantics. That becomes especially important as there's more variability and uncertainty, all these things. So being able to coordinate on systems that have a narrative or ontology, different ways to think about what that reference frame is, but enabling human accessible and computationally usable reference frames is definitely critical. Otherwise, there's always going to be this lost in translation gap going both ways. And then drawing from active inference, a community at multiple scales being able to say what is of pragmatic value and what is of epistemic value, what is of utility, what is going to align the world with what we want to see, what do we actually prefer, and then what would learning look like and what are we willing to learn.
We're at time, but it's an important conversation to continue. We're going to be here outside
Yes.
after the talk,
Thank you.
and I know we're going to
Fabulous
give you also
moderation.